Good morning. We're very honoured to have this morning Rear Admiral Neil Morisetti. He's the Head of Strategy at UCL in the Science, Technology, Engineering and Public Policy Programme. Neil, thank you very much for joining us this morning. We're very honoured to have you with us to give the keynote speech about climate security, and I was wondering whether you could talk to us a little bit about the risks of a changing climate.
Lara, thank you, and thank you for the invitation. I'm delighted to be here. The 21st century is proving quite a challenging century in the sense that there are more risks or threats to our prosperity and well-being than perhaps we were expecting. Some of those are traditional, state-on-state. Some of them are non-traditional or newer ones, non-state actors, ISIS, AQ, Boko Haram, but things like cyber as well. Now, to those, I think you have to add the impact of a changing climate, particularly at a time when there is increased pressure on resources, food, energy, water and land, and the effects of a changing climate, be it in the sense of increased temperatures, rising sea levels, increased acidity in the ocean, ingress of aquifers, salt water into the aquifers, accentuates the problems that we're facing and the stresses. It's a bit like pouring a bucket of petrol on a fire. Climate change acts as a threat multiplier rather than a direct cause of conflict. And it's particularly so in those countries, those fragile and vulnerable countries that are already feeling stress. A belt that runs north to south of the equator around the world, countries with already food shortages, water shortages, health problems, demographic issues, parts of the world where governments don't necessarily have the capacity and the resilience to look after their population, and we've seen conflict both within and between states in the past. And the evidence is increasingly show that the impact of changing climate is contributing to that. The Arab Spring, it's an element, the movement of people in Syria was a contributing factor after prolonged drought on the conflict there, and we're seeing signs of it in the Sahel, just for some examples. But we live in a globalized world, a world where what happens thousands of miles away affects all of us. And that instability, that movement of people, that uncertainty and risk can cause disruptions to supply chains for manufacturing, it can cause volatility in prices for raw materials. And ultimately, an unstable continent, such as Africa, means lack of markets for the goods that are being produced in the developed world. So it's very much a problem for all of us. So
in that sense, what can we do about it, and how can we go about providing solutions?
Well, I think the first thing is we've got to acknowledge it's a problem. And perhaps there is still a perception that it's an issue which is environmental, possibly social, it's certainly health, it's certainly economic. But it's only recently, or relatively recently, that we've understood that there are security implications associated. The very recent, this weekend's Munich Security Conference discussed it, and in other places. It's starting to be reflected in national security strategies in countries around the world, but it needs to be there along with all the other threats. And once you've acknowledged that threat, then you can start to deal with it, and you can deal with it in the way you do with many other issues. Understand the problem, understand the impact, and look to the solutions. Solutions that reduce the risks posed by a changing climate to the point at which they're manageable.
And what scale?
It's across all of society. It involves all elements. It involves international institutions, national governments, local governments, the private sector, be it individual citizens or business, non-government organisations. But the challenge is that we have to adapt the institutions of today. Most of our countries have institutions that were set up in the 19th and 20th century to meet the challenges that were faced then. Those institutions need to adapt to meet the 21st century challenges. 21st century challenges need 21st century solutions. And that includes a more cross-cutting approach, acknowledgement that in acting in one area there are co-benefits. For example, if you close coal-fired power stations and improve the air quality, there's a very immediate benefit in health. Similarly, if you have an energy strategy that reflects issues such as energy efficiency, you can drive down bills, whether it be for business and commerce or for the individual. So there are immediate co-benefits. At the same time, you are reducing the risk to geopolitical stability and therefore the risk to national security and well-being. Ultimately, there is no security solution to climate change. But by working together and by working in regional institutions such as the European Union, we can drive forward an agenda which not only mitigates the impact by a long-term strategy of low carbon clean technology, but we can also adapt to help build resilience and capacity in countries which are struggling to meet these challenges and therefore reduce the risk to our own countries as well as those.
And now to finish off, thinking about the role of the European Union, we are caught in a hard spot at the moment. We have had Brexit, we have Trump at the other side of the Atlantic. We are thinking about reconfiguring the European project. What role do you think climate security is going to play in the construction of a future European project?
Well, I think as the future European project evolves, it will be important that it's to meet the needs of the Europe of the future. So we have to understand what the challenges are. You have to drive with your headlights on full beam and look over the horizon, understand what the challenges presented to Europe are. From a climate perspective, I think we're already seeing some of the physical changes in our own countries, some of the extreme weather events. Certainly in the UK, we've seen poor harvest because of the prolonged wet periods. We've seen hot periods in Europe. We've seen the loss of life. We've seen an increased respiratory disease problems and challenges. So we need to address them. We're also seeing movement of population. We've seen migrants coming from North Africa. We've seen them coming from conflict in Syria. We will probably see a lot to come from Sahel, where the region is very vulnerable and is seeing the signs. And we need to work in order to build the capacity of those countries so that they can look after their citizens. And we should be working to see how we can help address Europe's problems. For example, in North Africa, there's a lot of potential energy through solar. Well, if we help develop that in the Maghreb, then not only would we benefit through the transmission of power to Europe, sustainable power, but also those countries' economies could develop, because without energy it's difficult to develop an economy. So, but it does require us to think beyond our boundaries and our borders. It requires us to think collectively and work as a European region. I would very much hope, personally I very much hope to see the United Kingdom as part of that process. It won't be as part of the European Union, but it doesn't mean it can't be as part of a wider European approach to our security and well-being, because without that we can't prosper, we can't enjoy life and do the things we want to do. So it's a win-win in that sense.
Well, thank you ever so much. It's been a pleasure having you here with us today.
Thank you.